All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Today is actually kind of a milestone. Episode number 50, which, if I'm being completely honest, I'm surprised I got this far, and it actually doesn't feel like I have been doing this long enough to have 50 episodes. But as of today, I do. And it shows that I've been a little bit off track occasionally, because if I release every Monday, by the time I get to 50, I should be getting really close to having been doing this for a year, but I've been doing it for over a year. So it's a good little reminder for me to step up my game and make sure I get something out every Monday, because 2 weeks from now should be the 1 year mark. But instead, I think 2 weeks from now is going to be about a year and 4 months. But I digress. Episode 50. Before we get into our guests, let's talk about the organization that is helping making this episode possible. So today's episode is brought to you by Onnit. Onnit is a health and wellness organization, and they have set up a landing page for those of you who listen to the podcast. If you go to Onnit, ONNIT.com/hot, upper or lowercase, doesn't matter. You're going to land on the Onnit Cleared Hot landing page, where you can get up to 10% off of anything that you order. The landing page, I'm looking at it right now. If you go from top to bottom, it's got the Onnit 6 body weight. That is more of a training protocol. Dig into there if you are looking for some creative ideas or different ideas or a place to get started when it comes to working out. Below that is the Alpha Brain free trial. I've talked a lot about Alpha Brain. I do use the product, and one thing, I was actually talking with my wife about this yesterday. I am selective how often I use it, because I wanted to have as big of an impact as possible. She is a horse, I don't want to say fanatic, but enthusiast. And she has actually mentioned to me multiple times about how the days that she has a lesson, she'll take the Alpha Brain and it really helps her. I find it to be the same case as long as I am selective with when I use it. Below that is the Total Primate Care. Those are the day packets and the evening packets. On the last episode, I talked about my prep for hunting season, and both Alpha Brain and the Total Primate Care are going to be in there. MCT oil is at the bottom, and as always, there's an asterisk with MCT oil. Use with caution and start by using less than you think you actually should. And the last product I want to talk about that I actually have very little experience with, but my wife has been raving about, is on the foods tab up top, there is the joint oil. And she has told me time and time again how much of an impact that has had with just making her joints feel better. So if you're looking for something new to try out, give that sucker a try. And as always, supplementation is the micro. Please take the time to get your macro dialed in first. Your diet, work on the big portions of your diet, right? Protein, carbohydrate, and fat. Get that into a ratio that works for you and that is not excessive. Then, let's get some exercise in there, some rest and recovery, and then you can start dialing into the micro. And I say this each and every time because I want you to get what you're paying for when it comes to supplementation. And no amount of supplementation can override the garbage disposal diet. So just keep that in mind if, in fact, you would like to support the podcast through your supplement purchase. And if you do, onnit.com/hot. My guests today. Let's start with Jocko. I would imagine that most people who listen to my podcast have an understanding of who Jocko Willink is. He is a retired Navy SEAL. He was also a former enlisted sailor that transitioned over to becoming an officer. Not the same route that I took, same end state. He did it earlier in his career. I did it later, and we actually went through different commissioning sources. But I digress. He is the creator and host of the Jocko podcast, which can be found on iTunes, and I highly recommend that anybody who listens to my podcast also get into iTunes and take a look at the topics that he covers. It is very leadership heavy, integrity heavy, I would even say motivation heavy. And when I'm having days where I maybe need a little bit of a bump, that's exactly what I do. I'll head over and I'll check out his podcast. He's also an author. A book that I reference often when public speaking, when asked about which SEAL category books I recommend. The only book that I respond with is the book that he and his business partner, Leif Babin, wrote called Extreme Ownership. Do yourself a favor, get a copy, and read it about 6 times. He's also got a new book coming out called The Dichotomy of Leadership, which I haven't read yet, but I would imagine it dovetails into Extreme Ownership, or maybe even goes a step further where Extreme Ownership left off. But I've already got my order in for a pre-delivery, and I'll actually, in the link of this podcast, not in the link, in the description of the podcast, I'll put a link to that in Amazon. So he was retired SEAL officer at that. He ran the West Coast training, which is where I've had had the most experience with him. Got out, founded a company called Echelon Front, and I don't want to misspeak about exactly what they do, but I would describe it as a leadership, consulting, and educational organization. They consult with individuals and organizations on the leadership front. I know they talk about teamwork as well. They do practical exercises, and his company has also started doing what they call the muster, which is where it's basically essentially a 2-day event where he brings his entire company together, and you really dive into the lessons that are learned in the Extreme Ownership book, and also what he and those who work for Echelon Front have experienced inside of the military and their diverse backgrounds. They're not all SEALs, which I think is a good thing. I know he's got some, or it has at least one aviator, in my opinion, coming at these topics from a different perspective or a different lens of the world is a great thing. Heard nothing but phenomenal feedback around everything that his organization touches. So he also has, if you go onto Wikipedia, I highly recommend you do this. He has an officer photo that is strong to quite strong. If you look at it for too long, you're probably going to go blind. So be careful, but take a look at it. He's a serious man. He's got a very serious message, and I highly recommend that you dig into it further and adapt it into your life. I'm telling you right now that you will have an incredibly positive benefit from it. Now, my other guest, if you listen to the podcast, you're going to recognize John Dudley. So John Dudley is, as of Wednesday of last week, he's a skydiver now who's very passionate about archery. And that's how I'm going to describe him coming forward, because he has what I'm going to call an addiction to skydiving. It hit him very quickly. Could be more powerful than crack cocaine. I have no experience with that, but I have experience with skydiving, and it hooks you pretty fast. I've also heard that crack cocaine does too. I have no idea how I got on that topic, so let's get out of there. He went through the accelerated freefall program while we were in San Diego, and he was actually halfway through it when we sat down to record this conversation. And it ties into why the three of us wanted to get together and actually talk. In a 3-day time period, we took somebody who had never touched a bow and exposed them. And then a group of people who had never experienced jiu-jitsu and exposed them to that. And then another person who had never touched skydiving and exposed that individual to that discipline. And it was an exercise, a phenomenal exercise in learning from people who are at the top of their game, and just the introduction and watching the eyes open and the interest and the desire and just all the great stuff that happens when you learn a new skill. And we actually end up opening the podcast talking about that. But like I said, if you're a fan of the podcast, you obviously know who John Dudley is. I'm tongue-in-cheek, obviously, that he's a skydiver who's passionate about archery. The reality is he's one of the best goddamn archers on the face of the planet. And I say that I could care less about how well he is able or has been able to put arrow after arrow after arrow where he wants it. What I'm blown away by is his ability to teach. Been very fortunate now to be around and a fly on the wall at multiple events where he has talked from soup to nuts about the mechanics of archery all the way to a strategy towards being on the podium. And I've been very fortunate in my military career to be around some very high-level coaches. I would say some of the coaches that were at the highest level possible, and he sits right in that category. If you're interested about archery, or you have a question about where to get started. People reach out to me as to where to get started. I'm not the best resource for that, but John is definitely a phenomenal, if not the best resource. Wow, great English. Resource. He has a website, knockonarchery.com. That is where you need to start your journey. That'll lead you to videos that he has on his Knock On TV series, his podcast, the Knock On podcast, that is also in iTunes. Again, if you have any interest at all in archery, you need to start going through the Rolodex of episodes that he has available and just start learning. Just like when I need a bump, maybe it's from motivation or I need some reassurance that I'm doing the right thing, I'll start scrolling through Jocko's Rolodex. Anytime I have questions about archery, and again, I know almost nothing about archery. I'm almost at my 1 year anniversary of actually kind of shooting a bow for real. I dig into the wealth of knowledge that John puts out on a weekly basis for free, and I recommend you guys do the same. So 2 masters of their... I forgot to say about Jocko too. I mean, he might choke me out the next time because I didn't say. He is a jiu-jitsu practitioner as well, and he owns in San Diego Victory MMA and Fitness, which is where we went to have our exposure / lesson / chokeout session. He was very gracious enough to give us the time to allow us to come into his facility and do that. So if you're in the San Diego area and you have questions about jiu-jitsu and wondering about a place to start, I would look up Victory MMA for sure. So let's get into this. Cleared Hot, episode number 50 with Jocko Willink and John Dudley. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
Gentlemen, first off, I don't know if the internet is actually ready for this because I get hit up all the time about you. You get hit up all the time about me. And I love it when your listeners ask you when I'm going to come on your podcast.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. Have you checked the list of people that have already been on the podcast?
Google. I get book recommendations too of books I've already done.
Yeah.
And I
John, are you ever going to talk about face?
Yeah. And I usually say, I just say, check podcast number 2 or check podcast number 68 or whatever number that book is. And then they're like, sorry.
Well, you never hear them from them again is what happens.
Yeah.
They quietly lurk back to their corner. The last few days have been awesome for reasons I think we've all talked about individually. Like last night, learning jiu-jitsu, intro, fire hose to the face, obviously, which is probably the only way you can describe an intro class from Jocko. Watching Dudley teach somebody about archery. I describe him as Yoda, but not green and much taller. And then hopefully, you learned a little bit about jumping. I was probably the weak link in that chain. But the fact that you get to get outside of your wheelhouse, and I know Jocko and I, we were talking about it at the archery shop, it's so cool to learn something new and get outside of your comfort zone, because I think we're all kind of the same. We might trend a little bit towards what we're good at and stick in that wheelhouse. But it's been really cool in the last 3 days to go one to the other, and just kind of see the eyes opening up a little bit. Like today, I saw John's eyes wide.
I was super mad at myself.
I literally told him when we got to the ground, please stop shaking your head at anger in yourself during the skydive. We'll debrief afterwards. You can tell he's aware enough in the dive. I'm sitting there looking at him. He's just like, God damn it.
Yeah. What was making you mad?
Well, I think part of the certification is that you have to focus on certain aspects. Mm-hmm. And whenever you're learning something new, you get taught something that you know as principle. But then when you're focusing on a next step and you lose like recollection of that principle that should have been a step, but you've stepped over it and you realize right away there's a reason that one was last time. Mm-hmm. So it's just, I don't know, I haven't really gone too far outside of my wheelhouse just because there's certain things that just weren't of interest. But these last few days have been so awesome for me because the slates are so clean that my natural, I don't know, like my natural personality of how competitive I am, it's really been ramped up these last few days because I've probably slept 4 hours. I literally slept 2 hours the first night here because I was thinking about all the things they were telling me that I should do. And mainly because we went to iFly the first night. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about things that I needed to do, within that frickin' tube. And then the next day when we did jiu-jitsu, I literally would wake up thinking about not only your fist in my throat, but I loved how Sharon and Harry have never done any type of self-defense ever. So literally we start the class with Jocko getting on top of Andy in a full mount, and he goes, okay, this is the full mount. This is a very bad situation for you. I could pound your face into the ground. I can have my way with you. And it's just like, oh, my God. So, and the fact that these guys took pictures, it wouldn't have bothered me until I got home and I started looking pictures of when you and I were rolling. And then I realized everything you were telling me, it computed, but it didn't compute at the level. And then the exact same thing is true for skydiving. Because I told Andy, I said, it should be mandatory that there's always a filmer with students, because when he told me my positioning, if I wouldn't have saw it firsthand, I would have argued it. Like I would have said, I think my hands were very, very good.
And I said, I think your hands were not very, very good.
We used to do that in the teams. You'd film guys when they're doing house movement, and the guys would just not believe what you were debriefing on, and then you show them, and then it's just it's shocking.
Yeah. Well, and the same's true for archery, right? I mean, when you and I were working, I could just say, here you were 20 minutes ago. Here's where you are now, and this is why I like it. And at that time, you didn't really know what I was even looking for. You were just trying to follow instruction.
Yeah.
But I think now that you've done it a few days, there's a good possibility, which is why I want follow-up. There's a good possibility that even though you had done it perfect then, there's a good chance a few things regressed.
For sure.
And that's what happened on my third jump today. Is that right? The third jump, I felt very solid, and I was super confident. But then there was almost a 2-hour lag between jumps just because of, transport up. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like that amount of time out of the saddle let me not have my routine as fresh. And by the time we walked up to the board and they said, okay, here's what you're going to work on, here's what you're going to work on, I was so focused on level 4, just looking at that. It's like at the start of the day, I had started on 1, checklist, then went into 2, this list, and on 3, I felt really good. I felt like that was my best jump.
Yep.
And then on 4, I felt like there was so much time that had passed that I lost focus. And as much as I wanted to do it right, I didn't. And I think people that don't try new things are missing out on life, because I'm fired up right now because I've got 2 things that are keeping me awake, literally keeping me awake. And I have this deadline right now with I've got a feature article for the biggest bow hunting magazine of the year, and it's officially 6 days late. And even this morning, the editor's calling me. He's like, this thing is going to print Wednesday night. And I said, I've rewrote the first paragraph to this 17 times because I'm literally writing it, and then somewhere in the middle of it, it says skydiving or legs are too high. It's like, what is going on?
Good times.
Yeah.
I keep trying to tell him that he's doing great. Like teaching people how to skydive. What year did you learn how to jump?
1993.
Did you? So you went through Yuma?
Yep.
Through the original
El Centro.
Okay. Wind tunnel involved at all?
Negative.
Okay, and these are the things that I'm like, yes, and now we shall begin. Teaching somebody to skydive without the wind tunnel is like playing chess in a dryer that's on. There's a lot going on.
That's a great analogy.
Spatial awareness, remembering all of those things that Dudley forgot on his last jump. She's doing phenomenally well. I keep trying to tell him he's doing great. What's amazing is that it's rare to see somebody that present in the moment learning those skills, because for most people it's completely overload. And some of the most horrendous jumps of my life, I've been holding on to a student ready to exit the aircraft, and they're supposed to visually look at you and check in. And they do visually look at you, and they say, check in. And in their eyes, you see the Mac scroll wheel of death, and it's just like, mother of God, here we go. And you exit.
And that's just they're horrified? Or is it they're panicking?
I think a lot of it depends on everything you've done leading up to that moment. Dudley, I don't like the word extreme sports or activities, but he's been in, I would say, some very intense moments, hunting, pressure-filled moments for sure. Right. And I bet you would agree that if you steep yourself in that particular cup of tea long enough, you develop a capacity to deal with it better. So he's not overloaded. People who come at the age of 18, like, man, I want to learn how to skydive. I want to be on YouTube. It's like, all right, cool. Let me introduce you to another instructor that's not me, that's going to teach you how to do this. Because they can't compute. It can't compress. You'll literally be making eye contact and giving them a corrective signal, and they're looking at you. It's like, what do you got for me? It's like this right here. But he's super heads up. He's alert. He's aware. He's altitude aware. It's rare to see that. And I was actually going to ask you, for most people coming into jiu-jitsu, are they aware or are they overloaded? Because I'm curious about the initial learning process.
Overloaded.
Yeah. It's almost like trying to learn how to skydive without the wind tunnel.
Yeah. And I was talking about the fact that jiu-jitsu is so vast. It's infinite. It's truly infinite. And so there's so much there that even, the intro class or whatever you want to call it is just a little tiny minuscule fraction. So there's so much stuff. So what you walk away from your first class in jiu-jitsu is these questions about body position, arm position, and life. You're saying, like, how does this even work? How did this even happen?
Yeah.
And yeah, you get overloaded.
It might be bad for me.
Skydiving or jiu-jitsu?
Probably jiu-jitsu more than any, just because my personality type. I don't know.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I feel bad saying that, because at least from that aspect, that plays into something that I think a lot of people are missing in life that I think is really important, and that's literally learning acclimation to pressure situations, and you're never going to learn it unless you jump in. You literally jump into the fire. So, people ask me, at least in my world of like big animals, how do I not get nervous when there's this giant bull screaming at me, or how do I not, get super nervous when there's like, I come around a corner and there's a grizzly bear right there. It's like, well, yeah, I can see that's nervous, but I actually remember one time shooting in a metal round where I was in a downtown street of Poland, and they put the target like at the end of a street because there was a big mural of the Pope there. And I remember drawing back at 70 meters, and I anchor in, and I get into my scope, and I'm like doing my best in a gold medal situation to keep my pin in the center of the target. And then I just seen all these heads just leaning into my scope because the crowd was lined up to the target, and everyone was fighting to try to see the archer. And all I thought was, how many years are you in a Polish prison if you just stuff a carbon arrow through someone's face? And I just, I started tremoring on the front, and I'm like, pull through, baby, pull through. And I pulled through, and as I came off the line, my teammate goes, Jesus Christ, Dudley. He goes, freaking get your shit together, like as we pass each other. And then he drew back, and he was literally in his scope about 2 seconds, and I just saw it start, and I go, yeah, get some of that. and it wasn't good. But I think
had he been to had you guys as a team been to like a sports psychology training so that he knew the right thing to say to you at that moment, which was get your shit together? That's awesome. That's a real way to support your teammate.
I think
right
like
there.
60% of men are just born with that particular trait of understanding what to say in that moment.
Yeah.
That really helped you out.
I think when you get to that level, the cream kind of rises to the tops at certain aspects. So I mean, there's times where, and there's certainly been times with teams in the past, because in the U.S. there always had to be open team selections, because that's part of the way the funding worked. Because the funding was like government funding on certain aspects, it had to be an open thing. So there's certainly been times where we've had people make teams where they were just flukes, and then you go to a big event and you think, this, like, we literally have a really green person that this is a wild card. Like, the wheels could come off this pony real quick. And I mean, and obviously there's times where people surprise you, and then there's times where people do what you would expect to happen, and that's never had dealt with that situation ever in their life. So I've talked in the past, it's like, when people say, well, how do I deal with performance anxiety when it comes to big events? And I'm like, you got to get to them. I lost way more than I've ever won, and it's because I got to a point where I finally just got pissed enough at myself to say, I am tired of losing in this situation. I need to execute right now. I mean, I know I'm nervous. I can't breathe. My freaking throat feels tight, but like, I've got to make this happen right now. And it just got to the point where some people maybe do it naturally, but I got to the point where I was mad enough at myself to where I flipped a leaf. And then once I flipped that leaf, then like, none of what I've done with you has been hard to me, because I've, like, a lot of times I've checked my pulse, and I've never gone over 65 in any jump that I've had.
We're going to throw a chest strap on tomorrow and see how valid that is.
Good.
Legitimately, but it's refreshing to see in the door, like, okay, you're with me, we're talking. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing as a guy stacked on a door, and you look back and you're like, oh no. He doesn't know what he's supposed to do. Yeah. What are your thoughts on archery so far in your extended archery career?
Yeah. As an archer, having shot, I don't know, 50 arrows or something like that. Oh, it's awesome.
Did you shoot this morning?
I did not shoot yet today.
Okay.
So it'll be a late night session.
What did you think it was going to be like? I guess
it was, to be honest with you, it was very much what I thought it was going to be like. It's target acquisition. It's the same kind of mechanics that you're doing for shooting.
Yep.
I guess that not the same mechanics. Well, you're looking for the same. I was saying the sight picture is the same as it is in an H&K rifle, which is awesome because I always preferred that sight. And you're looking for that sight picture. You're holding that sight picture. You're waiting for a surprise as you squeeze the trigger, and it's a very similar thing. So I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was awesome.
I liked how you described it yesterday as the mental break from the normal daily routine, a way to detach and go out there and reset yourself.
Yeah, no, it definitely is that, and you can sit there and, like I said, I'm pretty busy in general.
Yeah. And
so for me to be able to go and shoot, 12 arrows or something like that, which again I've just done it a couple days in a row. Like, okay, I can go shoot some arrows right now. Just nice and nice relaxing thing to do, and you can focus on these little things, and it's gratifying. It feels good. It feels good to hit that target.
Yep.
So, yeah, I like it.
I can't wait for a hunt. We just got to put it on the calendar now.
Yeah.
Given the fact you're busy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
370 days out of the year.
Yeah. Fairly busy.
Yeah. So, jiu-jitsu, you say it's infinite, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, given I've started about a month ago, I got a ton of questions. The human skeletal system is not really evolving. So how can it be infinite if the mechanism you're starting from is finite?
because you can manipulate it in infinite number of ways. And so maybe infinite's the wrong word. Maybe it's 180 billion. You know, like there's some, at some point you could, I guess, but it's a huge number. It's a huge number because you can do so much with the human body, and there's so many points to attack, and there's so much leverage involved, and then there's different, because even though all of the human body is all the same, well, your body is a lot different from John's body, which is a lot different from my body, and we actually have to change our jiu-jitsu to fit us at a certain level, and so that's a part of it too. There's counters, it just goes on forever. It really does. It goes on forever.
I was surprised to hear you say on the mat that you would have kicked your ass from 6 months ago.
Absolutely.
That was cool.
Yeah, and you got your black belt in 10 years, and you've had it for 12, and I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but to think that in just that 6 month time period, somebody who's already at your level is like, oh, no.
Yep.
Would have tossed
Yeah, because
myself.
I learned, 2 new things. So it's me with 2 extra things. I'm going to do those 2 things that I don't know to myself, and it's going to work.
And that's through different training partners and just consistently and
different
constantly
training
going after
partners,
it.
constantly going after it, constantly just trying to add to your game, getting out of your comfort zone, which is a lot of what we did over the last couple of days was out of our comfort zone. But if you stay in your comfort zone in jiu-jitsu, you won't progress as fast as when you get out. And I go through huge troughs of time where I stay in my comfort zone too much. I'm lazy. I'm not. My brain is contained in some weird place where I feel like winning more than I feel like learning. And if you feel like winning more than you feel like learning, you'll win more in that time frame. But in the long term, you'll lose because you're not progressing.
How often do you get tapped out?
I get tapped out, I would say between 1 and 5 times a week.
Yeah.
Or it's I was between 0 and 5 times a week. Yeah, something like that.
Is that generally due to a mistake that you make, or you're encountering somebody who has a skill level that's higher, a combination of?
Combination of.
Okay.
If the guys that I train with, if I make a mistake, I'm going to pay. And the guys that I train with, if they get a good position, it's going to be hard to get out of. So yeah.
I tap between 0 to 5 times, like every, I think 10 minutes.
Yeah.
would be a good starting point.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, we just learned this technique in isolation, and now I can't do it, and now I can't breathe, and this really light person is exerting 5x their body weight on me. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
It's
a powerful tool.
What's the biggest mistake you see people make when they start?
They can't relax.
Boom.
Yeah.
They can't relax. It's just like in the wind tunnel, right?
Yeah.
If you don't relax in the wind tunnel,
or if you do, or
if you don't, I mean, I guess I don't know if this applies directly to archery, but if you are all trying to get that thing to fire at that moment when you want it to, and you don't just relax and kind of let the arrow do the work, or let the bow do the work, and let it kind of happen, if you try and force it. I don't know. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, because when you're tight, you're static. Remember I told you that your accuracy really depends on dynamic movement rather than static movement. When people try to be static, then everything's just locked. So like the follow through isn't proper, and you're literally just trying to build trigger pressure, and when everything goes off, everything's just static.
You said something to me the other day. Your worst shots are the hardest ones, right?
Well, I told you,
what'd you
everyone's.
Everyone's.
Yeah, and I said your bad shots will be your hardest ones to make. And then you kind of looked at me like, I know where you're going with this, and I said the easy ones are going to happen with the least amount of effort.
Yeah, and I felt that. And the times where I just get up and kind of relax and do what I was supposed to do, relax, then it'd be a good shot. And when I was all trying to make things happen and all tense, then it doesn't work out that way. Which is when you were describing your situation, when you get mad enough, and I was thinking to myself, how does that help? And then you said, I got mad enough that I flipped the leaf. And that's the key point, because anyone that just gets mad about their performance, that doesn't help your performance. That makes your performance go down, unless you get mad enough that you go, okay.
Few people have the ability to reach that point and go that way, though.
Well, very, very competitive, especially ego-driven ego-driven personality types have a very difficult time. Task-driven can change it. But one of the things that I learned, which was possibly my most valuable, just based off my personality type now, or I guess how it's always been, but the lesson that I learned that was probably most important to my overall archery career was that the only arrows that I can affect are the ones that are still in my quiver. Because there was a few tournaments where I literally just jack slammed stabilizers over my knees. There was one time where I was the last. I hammer tossed this bow at one of my rookie events. I grabbed that long 40-inch stabilizer and just freaking wheel. There was a time I was practicing at home at 70 meters, and I was about ready to shoot a perfectly clean round in practice. I mean, like a 360 out of 360. And right when I got to that last arrow, I'm like, one more. And this is like, I was already visualizing where that target was going to go on my wall. And I freaking spit one out of the 9. And that was the only hole outside of that freaking 10 ring. And I hammer tossed that bow 70 meters. And I left it down at the bottom of my driveway by this culvert. And it was like 3 days later, my neighbor called. He goes, "Do you know there's like a brand new bow down by your mailbox?" And I go, "Yeah, and it's going to stay there." And I finally found a coach that when he told me that, he said, "Listen, no one can change time." And he said, when that arrow leaves, unless you have a string on it, there's no way you're pulling it back. And he said, so if you're going to let that one affect every other one that's in your quiver, he said, you're never going to be good. And I mean, I went home and stewed on it for a while, and then it just got to the point where when I made a shitty shot, I mean, there was times where I'd just look into my quiver and say, well, which one of you suckers want to freaking shoot a 10? Because obviously that asshole didn't. And once I started looking at it that way, I actually became a completely different athlete in my sport.
Yeah, I believe it. That's something we see all the time with the ego-driven people. And even, because I work with a lot of businesses, and so you see someone that got that attitude and someone makes them mad, and they think that that's going to help the situation, and it's actually not going to help the situation.
Counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Probably as a multiplier.
Yeah. It makes it worse.
Yep.
Have you found a lot of similar personality traits between like a lot of the high-level performers in the teams and the business world that you interface with? Because I've seen like the mentality he's talking about, right? Like being able to adapt, being able to change your personal thought process regardless of what's going on or control it. Like, okay, I recognize that. Jumping, kind of the same thing too. You see that a lot in business as well?
You do and you don't. One thing that's different about the business world is that some people come up with a really good idea, or they formulate a business based on something that they're doing, and they build a business around themselves, or they build a business underneath themselves, and they naturally they progress up the chain of command because it's their business. And eventually, next thing you know, they look up, they're the CEO of a business, and they got 300 or 400 or 500 people working for them. But that's because the reason they're there is because they had a good idea. Yeah. And it's just like in the SEAL teams. I mean, you could get officers that are totally squared away, that can detach from situations, that can assess what's actually happening, not based on their emotions. But you also get officers and senior enlisted guys that they lose their temper, they get mad, they get emotional. So it's the same thing. You see the same thing.
Yeah, I was surprised. Obviously, less business interface and interaction than you, but it's like all the high-level people, you see a lot of the similarities. Like, okay, I recognize this, and then I naturally gravitate towards those people because they win.
Yeah, and they're you're not going to get to the top. Like we talk about ego being bad, and I always, as much as I talk about ego being bad, I do have to remind people, including myself, that ego is good also. And you wouldn't be where you are, John, if you didn't have an ego that wanted to win. In fact, it's your ego that pushed you so hard that you realized that if you let your ego get in the way, then it's going to make you fail. So your ego was so strong that it beat your own ego, right? Like you had to put it in check. And that's a good sign, and it's a good thing for anyone to know that you progress to where you are because you want to win, but then if you let that ego continue to drive, it'll drive you back down.
I was talking with, you're familiar with who Mark Twight is, right?
Yeah.
I had him on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and right before I sat down with him, I was listening to one of his recent ones. And to tie into that, how ego can be positive and negative, people were, the person he was talking to was asking him about high-level achievement just in general, and what quality do you think is essential? And his response surprised me because he said hubris, which I look at as like, okay, and wildly over, you think a little bit too much of your ability, but at the same time, thinking a little bit too much of your ability might drive you down the path where you'll be successful. Most people look at it as a pejorative, but at the same time, it can be used as a positive as well.
I think it can get you to a certain point, and then if it goes too far,
much like the ego,
then you'll end up dead. If you're in a combat situation because you think you can't make any mistakes, you don't think you need to train as hard, you're going to end up in a bad situation. So but he's right in the fact that I've had people on my podcast, and you talk to them, and they think that the SEAL teams is like so hard. And you think like Travis Mills. Travis Mills is a guy. He's a total badass, and he was a great athlete in high school, multiple records, and he's a big strapping guy, and just a total stud. And I was talking about when he joined the Army, and he says, I kind of wanted to go for special operations or something, but I just didn't think I could make it. And he's like 10 times the man I was when I got done with high school. I was like such a loser. And yet I had the ego to think to myself, oh, SEAL teams, hardest training in the world, allegedly. I can do that.
Yeah.
And I did. And so there's a and it's just like, you meet some kid, and he'll come up and say, I really want to be a SEAL, but I don't know if I have it. Well, what's your background? Well, I'm a state champion wrestler, and I won, the freaking world record for 14-year-old crawl stroke. They're just total studs, but for some reason, they don't think they can do it. So there is something to that. However, I think you also have to keep that in check. That's why it's a dichotomy. It's a dichotomy. You have to balance those two. If you go too far in one direction, it's going to be problematic. If you go too far in the other direction, then you won't achieve anything.
Yeah. I was surprised by it because I looked at myself and it's like, maybe there's some things that I feel like I should do or I want to push myself to do is that hubris peeking out just a little bit. But I think as I've gotten older and been steeped in a little bit more risk, it has backed me off the edge a little bit. I think I found a better governor in my 20s in the SEAL teams. I don't know if that governor was in the peg yet.
Yeah, well,
that's age.
Yeah, you just get older.
It just truly, I was just like, yes, I can do that. Oh, walk on fire, yes, no problem. On standby, here
Bring
I go. A mile, okay, on my belly, let's party.
Bring it.
Yeah, but again, I was surprised I wouldn't have said hubris. The other guy said confidence, which I think is a no-brainer, but.
And confidence, I mean, that's a very similar thing, right? The confidence is the well-balanced ego. That's what confidence is. It's a well-balanced ego. When you're overconfident, well, then you have a big ego. That's your problem.
Yep.
And now you think you don't need to train for this event. You don't need to be ready. You don't need that's confidence that's gone too far. And humility can go too far as well. Because I always say the most important characteristic for a person to have is humility. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that, because that's where I lean, because most people have more of a tendency to think that they're better than they are. And so to be, I'm not as good as I am, and I'm going to work hard to be better. That's going to make that person better in the long run. You're not sitting there. I forget how many arrows you told me you shot in a year or whatever.
Oh, it was 5,000 last month.
Yeah. So like, you're not doing that because you think you've achieved where you need to be. You're not doing that because you're doing that because you're humble and you think, I got to stay on my game.
Well, I had people depending on me doing it. So I knew, yeah. But I think you're right. There's people, and I tell people all the time that ask me, well, why don't you compete? It's like, there's people that are that hungry that are that much better. I mean, when I couldn't beat myself when I was hungry for that. Right now, I'm not hungry. I would be right now, that old me would have been at Chula Vista shooting these last 4 days. I would have been shooting every single day. If someone said, hey, do you want to go 3 miles down the road, we can go skydiving, I would have said no, and I did. Or if someone said, you know, hey, do you want to go to a jiu-jitsu class, I would have said, hell no, I don't want to go to jiu-jitsu. I'm going to shoot another 200 arrows a day, and then I'm going to look at assessment, I'm going to get better, and, you know, I've got things I want to do right now. They don't involve that. So, I mean, you have to, I think you have to look at yourself realistically, but in the same sense, I think if your personality is at least something that really wants to progress at things, you're going to progress naturally because you're competitive. But I like personally being honest to myself, because at least for me, I feel like I progress at things when I'm honest to myself. Whenever I've been dishonest to myself, it's taken like a serious situation to where you're almost at a rock bottom point to where you have to like get some alone time and just realize, okay, who are you really fooling right now about this? Because I don't, you know, you can talk shit all you want, but when it comes down to it, once you start to realize this is really what's happening, I mean, then you gotta have a check, you know. And I've seen a lot of people that I've competed against that have been very, very ego driven, and they come out of the gates. I mean, they've raised hell coming out of the gates, and they're very, very hard to beat until there's a crack. And a lot of times when that is their only mentality, when that crack happens, they never find their way back again. Whereas someone that just is okay with honesty and humility and progression and then systematic approach, and they're realistic about where they're really at within their craft, they can have that time where they're in a slump, and then they'll normally come out of that slump better because they're honest with where they really were when they had the problem. And I think people with a really high ego, they'll struggle when that slump does hit. And it may take a long time for people like, you know, Tiger Woods. It may take a long time for that to hit, but if all of a sudden there is that, sometimes it really gets tough to get out of it for that person.
Ego, humility, the confidence, the hubris. I love how the fact that you speak with such authority about this stuff, because I know that you spend a lot of time thinking about it. Were you always like that in the teams? I mean, were you like that before the teams? Is this something that developed as you grew in the teams, or did you bring this with you?
It developed, yeah. I would love to sit here and tell you that when I was a 19-year-old guy in a SEAL platoon,
you had it.
I was saying, listen, gents, the most important thing we need to do is stay humble. No.
Yeah, I don't like your ego, gentlemen, because all you would hear is...
Yeah. So, no, I was really lucky in my career, and I was observant, I would say. Yeah. And I would say one of the luckiest things that happened to me is I got put into a SEAL platoon that had a really bad officer. And we ended up firing him, which is a mutiny, and doesn't happen very often, but it happened. And then a great officer came in and took that officer's place. And that, to me, just the juxtaposition of these two guys, one who no one liked. We wanted to make him look bad. We would screw things up and sabotage things so he would look bad.
Yeah. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. And then the next guy comes in, and you know, we would do everything we could just to make him look good. We just wanted to support him. And so in the back of my mind, I was thinking, that's interesting. What did these two guys do different? And the main thing that the two guys did different is one guy had a giant ego and the other guy was super humble. And so I recognized it, but I didn't recognize it like you know, crystal clear. It was just a subconscious thought. And then as I saw other leaders and saw the way people reacted, the way I reacted to other people, and then the way people reacted to me, like when I moved into a leadership position. Okay, well, how am I going to act? Oh, am I going to act like the guy with the big ego that thinks he knows everything, or am I going to act like the guy that actually did know everything but was super humble and we all respected? Like, I tried to act. I didn't succeed by any stretch all the time, but that's what I aimed for. And then once I took over training, and then, I got very lucky with my deployments overseas. I got, very lucky with the people that I worked with, and I got very lucky with the deployments that I had. And so I saw a lot of different leaders. I saw, different Army and Marine Corps leaders, some of the best guys I've seen, and some other guys that weren't so great. And again, I'd see the same pattern, sort of like, oh, this guy actually listens to his men, whereas this guy doesn't. And the guy that doesn't listen, guess what? They're not as effective. And so I saw that. And then really the final building blocks were when I was running training for the West Coast SEAL teams, and I got to put SEAL platoon after 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 SEAL, just over through the same iterative training, and to see the way the different leaders impacted SEAL platoons, it just was so obvious to see. And by now I had some decent experience, and I'm sitting there watching over and over again and identifying these things. And so that was kind of that was where it really started to come together. And on top of the fact that I was watching, I was also in charge of teaching it. So now I had to not just watch it and think about it. I had to capture it and explain it.
Yeah.
And so that was that's kind of the progression. And then when I got out, all of a sudden I'm working with companies, and I'm working with all these different companies, all these different kind of leaders, and I'm seeing the same. I get to see the same sort of outside view of all these situations. Then on top of that, throughout this course, I'm reading, and I'm reading only about war. And it's like I can barely read a book that's not about war.
Still to this day,
I can barely read a book that's not about war. And I was going to do a book on the podcast that's not about war. It's a great book. It's a fantastic book. It's a fantastic book about leadership. It's called American Icon. It's about Ford. It's about Mullally. Did a great job. It's incredible leadership lessons. I was going to do it on the podcast. And as I'm starting to prepare for the podcast, I'm pulling out the things that I'm going to read. And I'm like, I can't do it. I can't do it because it doesn't really mean anything to me the way reading about a guy that was in the trenches of World War I, or a guy that was going on the beaches in Iwo Jima. Like I have a emotional and like some almost genetic connection to those guys, and I just when I think about it, it's what I want to talk about. So interlaced in all that time period, I was reading. I wasn't reading a ton. I don't even remember when I got About Face, which is the book that really started to clarify things for me. And that's not a book that he doesn't talk about leadership in it, barely.
It is confused for a leadership book often.
Yeah, and for me, it's a pure leadership book. But reading it and reading it over again, and then reading it over again, and then seeing exactly what was happening in a SEAL platoon or in my unit, and seeing exactly the way it was happening, and thinking to myself, I've seen this before. And so the reading on top of that, and now since I retired, and like with my podcast where I'm reading all the time. I mean, I was an English major in college, and I read way more than I even read in college. And so I'm reading all the time, and I'm reading with a different attitude, because there's this quote that I've recently said on my podcast, which is from a book that I read on my podcast. But the quote it's from Musashi, the Japanese sword fighter. And he said, when you know the way broadly, then you see the way in everything. And so as this thing kind of grew in my mind, the more you see it, the bigger it gets, and the more you see it in everything. And so at this point, I mean, I see this stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
I see it everywhere now.
Parenting, grocery store, like I know exactly what you're talking about.
Parenting, grocery store, relationships, jiu-jitsu, archery, you were talking to me. Well, for one thing, like I shot 30 arrows or something in the morning, or maybe even not even that. But then in the afternoon, he's like, hey, you want to shoot some more? And now there's a big crowd. And then he's like, oh yeah, by the way, we're doing this live on whatever, some social media platform.
Yeah, hold on, let me get a couple people over here to watch
and so it's a big crowd. I'm sitting there, and he's like, well, we'll see how you do under the pressure. And I'm like, I'm not even here right now.
But I did say that sarcastically.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool. In my mind, I was like, you know what?
I'm glad I
okay.
had a poker face.
Yeah, and I just was like, cool, I'm not even here right now. I'm just going to do what you told me to do.
Yeah.
And that's the best you can do. And for one thing, I'll say, like, when you talk about the competitive nature, like, I went into that archery situation thinking, okay, I am a fool. That's where I'm at right now. If I can do anything like slightly better than just a complete idiot, then that's fine. Because this is something I know nothing about, and I just tried to listen to what you were telling me. And man, I want you to know, like, because I've taught a lot of people over the years, and because I've taught a lot of people from ground zero, the instruction that you gave me, like, I didn't really say this, but I was super appreciative of how you were teaching. And I'm thinking, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you teach all the time. You teach all the time. And I'm thinking, man, he's a good teacher. I'm like, this is just, for him to be saying everything that you're saying to me, I'm like, oh yeah, he's saying that, and I know exactly what he means. And he's not telling me 8 other things right now, because I'm not even ready for those 8 other things. And he's just trying to get me this one little thing. And he's, saying good job. And just you're just a really good teacher. And so to get a start like that, and I've heard a couple people talking about how when, like, you first start shooting, it's all crazy. And honestly, I was like, boom, there we go. Boom, there we go. And it felt really good because your instruction was outstanding. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You started off at a good spot. People hit me up about once a week. They're like, you cheater. Like, I'm sorry that I know somebody that you don't, and my only goal in life is to do exactly what they tell me to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not rocket surgery here. I'm not putting a satellite into geosynchronous orbit.
Yeah. No, it's and it was very cool for me, as you started off this whole conversation by saying that, and I told you, like, I don't really do new stuff very often.
Yeah.
And it's not even that I don't want to, but how many hours are in the day? And I am pretty obsessed with certain things, I'm definitely obsessed with doing my work good. I'm obsessed with doing a good podcast. I'm obsessed with jiu-jitsu. I'm obsessed with trying to stay in good health. And so to just like toss some other thing to be obsessed in over the years just doesn't work out very well. And so it's cool for me to be able to learn something that I'd never done before and get incredible instruction. And
I think it'll help you with those things too, because like you're saying, especially if you live a lot between the ears and a lot of the stuff that you're doing, to be able to just detach from that and focus on something else.
For sure.
I heard somebody describe it once as therapy 20 yards at a time. They rip off 6 arrows, and it's like, whew, and they walk and they go get them and they pull them. And I've had the same experience in my backyard. Like, if I'm having, I don't write nearly as much as you do, or at the level. It's like, got it. Okay, good. Next word.
No, actually, you're a great writer. I've read your stuff. Your stuff on my podcast, and you're a great writer from your esteemed educational experience.
2.7 GPA, public school system, high school, no big deal. English was my favorite class, and I always liked the creative writing stuff. But when I get stuck and I need, how would be the best way to describe this? I don't always win the emotional battle sometimes with my spouse, and I might get a little too engaged. And if I need to reset or detach, I'll literally go grab my bow and just go into the backyard, and it's the therapy at 20 yards starts. It helps me with everything else that I do to just have some, like, I'm just going to look at this pin. Yeah. I'm just going to look at the pin. It helps. I think it'll actually enhance the stuff that you do.
Yeah. Well, it's, again, when you see the way broadly, you see it in everything. And so even in this, I'm thinking that, it's teaching me to be better at detaching from situations. It's teaching me to be focused on things. It's teaching me to focus on smaller muscle movements, right? Because it's a lot more it's smaller muscle movements, right? You're holding this position and you're doing these really small muscle movements to achieve the goal, and it's not throwing up a kettlebell, which is a big muscle movement that doesn't take very many fine motor skills. It's fine motor skills. I guess that's the big difference for me. And I don't do a lot of stuff anymore that is fine motor skills other than just regular shooting. So
I think he found the place for it though.
Yeah.
With what he does. Archery, I think, is very, very therapeutic in the fact that if you're doing it for the right reasons, it'll give you very good clarity on whether or not your mind is able to focus on your task at hand or whether it's somewhere else. So if you go out and you're shooting and you're knowing what you need to do, but you're obviously not shooting well with focus and, and very fluid, minimalistic, mind-body connection, then you're going to probably say, what's really holding me back right now? And honestly, like with you said that would be a good break from when you're trying to write, because I'm the same way. Like right now I'm trying to write this article, but my mind is obviously somewhere else,
getting choked.
Yeah. And and my legs, front flips,
Positive legs, man.
yeah, front flips at 5,000 feet. I think if you're really there to shoot and clear your mind, it's a balance. A lot of the things that came out of Asia are so relative today, and people don't even, like, people need to go back and realize how truly smart those people were. And they were doing a lot of these things, right? Archery was very big then. So obviously them having a clear mind and doing things that were, obviously required just mass and hard work, and then to be able to want to get out of that grind and go back and decompress and have some family time, there was obviously some type of a thing in between. And whether it was meditation or whether it was a lot of their martial arts, they were trying to find something that was a complete counterbalance to the things that they were having to do. And I think we all still need that right now today in this grind. I mean, if and I think that's why people are gravitating towards this. And I think that's why people are gravitating towards things like CrossFit too, because there's so many jobs right now where I'll go in, and although the offices look cool, I'd feel like a fish in a fish tank. I mean, I would literally say, where do I go to just throw things around and rage out for a little while? Because, I can't throw something in my office. If I chuck something across my office right now, someone's going to get, Susie's going to get mad about it and go to HR, and I know that's going to happen. So I got to just kind of contain myself, and I just sit there and just, so these people need this. Yeah. And I think people that don't get it, they just get miserable and want to end up trolling someone on social media because they have like no release.
Yeah, well, people ask me pretty regularly, do I meditate? And I always say, I do jiu-jitsu. Yeah. I surf. I throw kettlebells around. And now I'll be saying I shoot arrows. And what's nice about shooting arrows is it's like pretty, well, at least from my perspective right now, it's something that I can do for 20 minutes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you can't, you need someone to do jiu-jitsu with you, and you're going to get all sweaty, and you got to take a shower, and it's just like a time situation. But to be able to go out and just crack a few rounds downrange is kind of nice.
You said it was nice too, just because of the sound, like relating to military people.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. So I was telling him, after I shot, and I realized that when you're shooting a gun, and I got over this when I was 19 years old, whatever, in the SEAL teams, you're like, okay, this thing makes a loud noise all the time. And all these guys that are sitting next to me, their little thing makes a bunch of noise too, and that's just the way it is. And so you just get used to it, but you don't realize it becomes norm. It becomes the norm, but then when you're shooting and it's just a little, and you think, man, this is nice. It's like when you shoot an MP5 SD and you go, wow, this is awesome. This is so cool, because it literally is that. It's super quiet, but so it's nice to have something that's not cracking your brain, which is something that we've all gotten so used to we don't think about it anymore. But then when it's gone, you go, wow, this is nice. This is nice little escape.
Well, when your standard is a controlled explosion 2 inches from your face.
Exactly.
With
exactly.
A fiery gas ball generally coming back at you and your buddies. It's a little bit of an adjustment. It's cool in the wild, too, to see the reaction or lack thereof to the animals as well. I'm eating and like, what was that? All right, I'm just going to continue eating, I guess.
Did a tree fall? Did a branch, did a leaf fall over there? I think I'm going to be okay.
I tell you what, I had resisted hunting for years. Even people were offering me when I was in the military and then afterwards, and I always associated it with a rifle, a high-powered. In my brain, it's always a suppressed 300 Win Mag, even though I'm not sure that's allowed for deer. If you were to give me a choice of any gun on earth, it's going to be that one. And I had no interest in it. I never thought to connect it in any other way. So people are like, hey, man, come hunting with me. I'm like, I don't have any interest in sitting in a lawn chair, even though I know this isn't what it's like. That's what I thought of, like a lawn chair with a set of binos and a deer. I hear all these people talking like, oh, man, I got this guy at 250, man. That's the longest shot I've ever seen. I'm like, all right, were you like shooting iron sights or, like, did you close your eyes?
Offhand.
Yeah, standing right in the wind, 30-knot crosswind, full value. And then I picked up a bow, and it was immediately like, whoa, this is a completely different, just slammed in your face.
Yeah.
I just didn't think it would be fair because, I mean, realistically, probably out to 1,000, like I win. But then it's like, okay, hold on. I'm missing at 40 yards. There's something here that I need to explore a little bit.
Yeah.
And then trying to get to 40 yards on some of these animals? Are you kidding me?
Crazy.
It immediately tapped me back into, like, I was like, oh, man, this is as much as I like doing snorking in sniper school. Oh, my God. This is like any type of I mean, I don't know about you, but I was playing freaking G.I. Joe since whenever. And, dirt on your face and crawling around and definitely aiming at people's eyeballs with a BB gun. No eye pro. It immediately drove me back into that, and I think that's why I went in with Dudley just hook, line, and sinker. After the first trip, which is we're going back up to, for the first time, I'm repeating a location in a couple weeks.
Nice.
But even like halfway through the first day of the first trip, I was like, oh, God. This is going to be a problem. I hope that you have the same experience too, because and I've seen it happen with a lot of vets. Joe was actually talking about
almost
this.
I would say everyone I've dealt with.
Yeah, but
no, I can't say that.
But Joe was talking about it. I forget who he was talking with, but he, from an outsider's perspective, I would say what he was trying to say is that he was surprised by the draw that it has to the veteran community. Specifically people with backgrounds similar to ours, regardless of the service. But then I started thinking, like I already said, sneaking around, trying to get close, trying for you not to see me while I do something you might not like. Mm-hmm. Like it makes total sense.
Yeah.
And for me, it helped because there's like additional motivation to train. Like elk season's right around the corner. You know what? I don't feel like getting in the gym, but I need to get in the gym. I don't really feel like shooting my bow right now, but I need to shoot my bow. I'm looking forward to being there for your first experience in the field because it adds to that 20-yard therapy at a time. I literally felt kind of rejuvenated and just was like, okay, cool. It's like 80% of what we used to do.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that I like is having this goal at the end. And what I'm thinking about right now is I'm thinking, hey, I've got to be good at this because I'm going to be in a pressure situation, and if everything I have to think about is going to cause me problems if I'm not proficient. And so having that as a long-term goal and knowing that there's going to be a time when I'm going to need to do this right, then I think that's great to have that in your just like when if you're running, you say you sign up for a race in the future, that means you go, okay, I'm going to prepare for that. In jiu-jitsu it kind of happens every day because every day you're thinking, you got the wolves, right? I mean, there's wolves and they're on the mat
and they're circling you.
And they're circling you and they're so every day you kind of get that. But sometimes you can shelter yourself a little bit. Whereas if I'm going to compete on this, if you compete in jiu-jitsu, then you step it up because that's you're going to have to bring it that day. So there's having an ultimate goal like that is a kind of high pressure situation with some stakes around it and some consequences around it. I think that makes people prepare more.
Do you compete or did you compete in those tournaments?
I competed all the time. Yeah.
Do you still or did you?
No, I haven't competed in a pretty long time.
How do you pick your training partners?
I just pick the best possible guys I can find. Yeah.
I liked. I was telling Dudley today. When he asked you to, or he asked Trevor actually to take some pictures of you teaching him some stuff, And I could see you thinking like, all right, what are we going to do here? And then you finally said, just attack me. No, like literally just do whatever you want to do. Just attack me.
Just try and kill me.
It just kind of drove that question. I'm like, well, I don't know if that would always be the best approach to training with somebody.
Yeah, it's a good way because it kind of lets the person, because you know, am I going to say try this when you don't really know that much? It's like just try and attack.
What's the longest time you've taken off
From jiu-jitsu?
Yep.
I had neck surgery, and I probably didn't train for, I don't know, it was pretty long. It might have been 2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably the longest I've taken off.
I don't know if many people would say that's very long, but
Yeah, and I'd have to check the records on that one, because that surgery hurt me a lot, and I was, hey, going into it like whatever, hey doc, how long is it going to take? Oh, you're saying 3 months? Cool, I'll be ready in 3 weeks. and then I also said, oh, you gave me some pain pills, that's fine, I don't need them, I'm not going to need them. And I got home that night, and once the whatever they give you in the hospital, the real
wears off.
Yeah, once that wore off, I was saying to myself, oh damn, yeah, this hurts a lot. And what you don't realize is that your head weighs whatever your head weighs.
Yeah,
mine's filled with rocks, and so it probably weighs something.
Even no one knows what that weighs.
When they cut open the back of your neck, there's all these muscles there.
Yeah,
and all those muscles are working 24 hours a day. They're working. There's no position that I found after I got neck surgery, there was no position that I found that my neck muscles were not working, other than I was laying on my son's bed, which was low to the ground, and I stacked books on the end of it until it was the perfect height, and I could get there and I could lay there and it wouldn't be, and that's where I was sleeping. And so it hurt. So that was probably, I forget what the time frame was, but it was like 2 or 3 months where I wasn't able to train.
How long ago was that? I
want to say 2008. Maybe.
Oh, so you were still in then, right? Or did you?
Yeah,
you got out?
I was in.
Okay,
I was in. I got out in 2000. Retired in 2010.
Okay, yeah. So you were 3 years before me.
This is my favorite picture. Look how excited Andy is right there.
I'm like, oh yeah.
You see do you see how excited he is for you to wreck my freaking esophagus?
You're just like you just white knuckling my head and squeezing as hard. It looked like you're doing a 500-pound deadlift. That's funny.
Well, I was. It was your head. It's like slinging that freaking Bigfoot on it kettlebell around.
But that goes back to, like, I was asking the biggest mistake, right? Like that strategy. I'm gonna exert 100% of contractile potential until I'm exhausted.
And that's why when you asked me what's the most important thing for a person that's just starting jiu-jitsu, I said relax.
Yeah.
Because when you're not relaxed, you can't even see. You don't even know what's happening. And it's hard. You I'm not saying you got to go out there and be a wet noodle, and you have to use your strength at some point. But the less you use it, the quicker you're going to learn, the better you're going to get.
Yeah. Would you say that it's a fair comment that you changed training for the West Coast SEAL teams when you took over at Tradet?
I don't know. I'd say that the training mechanisms that I grew up in and that we grew up in was rooted in the history of the SEAL teams. And having some of the old guys like Roger Hayden, when he came on my podcast, and he came on twice, and he's talking about the point man course that he developed with Glenn Acker in 1971 when they came home from their third tour in Vietnam. And I'm saying to him, we still run that course. We still do that. So we were taught, I was taught that you train hard, and then that's what we did. And that's when I took over training. I tried to carry on that tradition of the SEAL teams, which is you train your ass off to be ready for war.
It felt different. I missed a lot of it. Departing and heading to the East Coast, because obviously the training cycle is different. I experienced Tradet peripherally a little bit. It wasn't what it was like when I went through, I think we called it SQT. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it was all the teams all together doing everything.
And when I went through, it used to be called STT, and it was at the team.
No, that's what it was. It was STT, not SQT.
So I went through STT at SEAL Team 1, and it was hardcore.
Yeah.
And
your Trident board, a couple day long.
Yeah, that was hardcore too.
Office to office. Here's weapons laid out on the table, and they go, Dudley, disassemble the 60 and tell me about every single piece, every name, what it does, and God help if you pick it up and don't clear and safe it first and point it in a safe direction, you fail instantaneously.
Yeah.
Then it's the AR or the M4, then it's the pistol, then you got to go plan a diving from soup to nuts, the tides, the dive, the time, the navigation. Yeah, it was a different world, and the training that I got at Team 5 prior to going out to the East Coast, it was different. It had a different flavor to it, and I don't know if it was because we had been at peace for too long. But then when I came back and was augmenting the Team 3 stuff, it had I would say a more realistic, more aggressive, more pin in the modern day.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had literally just came home from Ramadi, so.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I feel like you were at the helm of making a lot of the changes.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to make sure that guys were ready, and coming home, you know, when we got home from Ramadi, it took another 4, 5, 6 months before it got pacified, and we kind of saw the indications when I was on deployment, but as far as I was concerned, everyone was going back into Ramadi. In my mind, everyone was going back into Ramadi, or they were going back into Afghanistan. And I didn't fight in Afghanistan, but I knew what was happening there, and I had plenty of friends that fought there, and so who had debriefed me, and so I just wanted to make sure guys were ready, because there's no worse feeling in the world than thinking that you're not ready when you're in a combat situation. That's the worst, most awful, sickening feeling. And even when I would see someone, I tell this story a lot, and it's not long, but I would see a kid, like I'd see a new guy standing in the middle of the street in the mountain town, and I would feel it lasted for probably about 6 months or a year. When I'd see a kid like that, I would feel a sickness in my stomach. I would feel sick because I was waiting for them to get shot. And I'd go over and I'd be like, "Hey man, you got to get cover. You can't stand out in the middle of the street like this. You cannot do that. You will get killed if you stand out here." And it was really, really a powerful feeling. And and then where I focused most of my effort was on the leadership, because I realized that if the leadership wasn't able to make good decisions, good timely decisions, good tactical decisions, man, everybody in that platoon, didn't matter how good they were individually, if they were getting bad leadership, it was going to be a real problem.
Did you get any flack or resistance to the changes that you wanted to make?
No, not really.
Or you just crushed them and went through them?
Is it because of what you and I talked about?
What did you and I talk about?
Remember when we talked about just picking your battles?
Yeah. Yes. So we talked. Yeah. So now I know what you're talking about. Sometimes if someone says, "Hey, we still want you to do, this random thing," and I'd be like, "Oh, is that important to you, sir?" "Yeah, that'd be really good." "Okay, we got it." Now, and I would do things that, I'm going to play the game, right? If you're my boss, Andy, and you're telling me, "Hey, I want you to do this," and I'm like, it doesn't negatively. Maybe it's not the smartest thing. Maybe it's not the way I would do it. But you know what? He's my boss. We'll take care of it. "Oh, you want us to wear matching hats for TRADET when we're out on the range?" "You know what? We can do that." You want us to wear, matching shirts so that everyone can clearly identify the RSOs when we're on. "Okay, you know what? We'll do that. Absolutely, sir. That's a good call." "You want me to cut out sniper overwatches during mount because you don't think it's going to be a mission that guys will be doing?" "No, we're probably, sir. Let me tell you. Here's what's going on. Here's different cities that still have problems. So when okay, Jocko, I didn't realize that. Okay, yeah. Why don't you keep doing what you're doing?" So I would build up the leadership capital up the chain of command, and and nothing. Well, as far as I was concerned, and as far as the people that I worked for were concerned, they were looking at the training going, "Yeah." I mean, I remember standing with one SEAL team CO, and we're looking out at this like valley, and there's just lasers everywhere, and explosions are going off. Down men are being carried.
Dudley's getting excited.
Yeah, and I said, "Hey," I'm like, "this is as good as it's going to ever get. Like, this training is awesome." It was awesome. And it was because I had great guys at the training detachment that ran all this training and set it all up. I had guys that I'd get out to a target site, and there'd be a guy that had been out on the target site with a 3-man or 4-man team putting explosives in for 4 days, digging in pits and putting explosions. So it was going to be awesome. And believe me, when when you're a young platoon commander and you're in a building and all of a sudden there's 28 like 1 pound C4 explosions going off, at random moments for the next like 3 minutes, it rattles your cage, boy. and that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted. I wanted the guys to be under a massive amount of stress, because what you can't do in training is you can't kill anyone, you can't wound anyone, and you can't bring out that emotional piece that they're going to have to deal with as well.
I was wounded in training, and Jocko gave the individual that wounded me a Navy Achievement Medal. We were in that mount town with Team 3 using wax bullets that sting like a bitch through clothing. And I forget I was inside, I remember that. And this guy literally comes running in and jack kicks the door foot first and just goes... He was like in the street, and he disappears, and I don't know what he was doing other than beating Usain Bolt at a 40-yard dash. Comes in, spraying from the hip. I take one of those paint rounds directly in my lip, which immediately swells to the size of this microphone. And I'm pretty sure I heard that laugh in the background, just ha, ha, ha. And in the debrief, he literally asks, "Who was it who did that?" He's like, "I'm putting you in for a Navy Achievement."
Yeah,
So
you should have heard the write-up.
People get wounded in your training job.
Yeah,
I'm literally sitting there in the debrief with just a pack of ice on my face, like, God damn it.
Yeah, but what was one of the most rewarding things in my whole career was having guys that then deployed overseas, and they would come back. Either they'd send me an email and say, "Hey, we got in a giant tick yesterday, and it was literally 20 times easier than what you put us through. Thank you." And I've had multiple guys come back and say, "Hey, we were in really bad situations, and everything you taught us was spot on. Everything your cadre did was spot on." It definitely wasn't just about me running that training. It was the great guys that I had in there that were running it, all the senior enlisted guys that had just come back from overseas, and they did a fantastic job. And also, I'll tell you what was awesome was after the guys that I trained, or the guys that we trained at TradeAt over like the next, what was it, like 2 years, or it was actually 3 years, they had a massive kill count and no SEALs killed, and that was freaking awesome.
It was interesting seeing the training because, like I said, it is a little bit of a time warp / detachment going to the East Coast and coming back and observing a lot of the training and then participating in it and seeing the complexity of some of the problems that were thrown at, literally sometimes, people with guys in their first platoon. When that Team 3 troop that I was with, I think of the 44 that we took, or it was in the 40s, it might not have been exactly 44, but that went over to Afghanistan, I was the only person who had ever set foot in that country. There was a couple people who were on their second or third, and obviously the leadership was a little bit farther down the road, but I remember the first time a round cracked off for some people. That was the first time they had ever heard when there wasn't a blank or a simunition round going by their head, and they performed really well. It's a testament, I think, to the complexity, because it was interesting sitting back and the cadre leaves and the real debrief happens. These goddamn guys, these are no-win situations, and maybe sometimes you need to work yourself through a no-win situation, but it still imprinted lessons that help them later on down the road.
With the no-win situations, what's funny is, so John, I'll tell you, bring you into this a little bit. So we'd set up these scenarios, and they'd be super hard, and we had this multi-million-dollar laser tag system, which was badass, and you could shoot people at like 350. 400 yards, kind of, but 350, you're gonna get a kill. And then we had paintball, and we had all this special effects, and it was crazy. And so we put them, and if you looked at the schedule, I would have the schedule written out of like what's going to happen. We had little names for these things. We had little names for these events that were going to happen. Corner of Death, and the octopus, and so we would know what was coming. But like when we were doing CQC, it'd be like, fire sack, which means we're going to surround you. We're going to kill half of you guys. Then we'd have a barricaded shooter, and he's going to kill half of you guys. And in between these, it'd be like dry hole, or it'd be. And so the guys would go out. They'd get their asses kicked. They'd come back. We'd debrief them. We'd spin them up really quick. We'd send them back out in the city. There would be nothing happening. Everything would be smooth. They'd come back. We'd hit them with another target. They'd go out, hit that one. Everything would be a disaster. And they'd come back. They actually wouldn't even remember doing the dry hole runs or the runs where they didn't get any contact. And I'd say, hey, here's what you guys just did. You did 2 ops out of the 6 ops you did tonight. 2 of them you took no enemy contact. Do you remember now? And I'd say this building and this building. They'd be like, oh yeah. And I'd say, what did you learn from that? They didn't learn anything. And so that's why we put this pressure on them. And the other reason we put pressure on them is because, man, I wanted training to be harder than anything they would ever face on the battlefield. That was absolutely 100% my goal. So,
and there's 2 avenues. There's one for, I'd say, the shooter level, called the E5 sled dog, and then there's that's a certain kind of stress, but at that level in your career, you're just like, for the love of God, don't let me mess up my job. Please, in the debrief, don't point at me and say my name. All you want to do is just survive and do your job. And it's tough, but it's also, I would say, E5 shooter, best job on the face of the planet. Then there's the leadership. And you're in the same situation, but the difference in stress and the complexity and stress are totally divergent.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, one has a gun, the other one doesn't. But
Yeah.
I think what I saw, like I said, looking at it from an outside perspective and coming into it with probably a little bit slightly above average level of experience, was I was able to sit back and watch the leadership and just go, oh, we should probably start taking notes on this person right now. And I think you and I had that realization at the same time.
Yeah, there's some guys that wouldn't be able to do the job as a leader, and a vast majority of the time their problem was their ego. Their problem was too much hubris. Their problem was that they thought they knew everything.
Yeah.
And I don't find that offensive. I really don't find it offensive. I want guys to be confident. I want them to think that they can kick ass. But when they don't kick ass and their reaction is that it wasn't my fault, it was someone else's fault, it was that the training is too hard. It's like, people would say that you're running this training, it's too hard. I'm like, you're the 17th platoon I've put through this year. Everyone's done it. We changed nothing. It's not the training. What do you think it is? I got a bunch of new guys. Guess what? You have 4 new guys. The average SEAL platoon right now has 6 new guys. What do you think it is? Well,
we're not getting good enough food.
We're not getting good enough food. We're not. Well,
you're not letting us sleep enough, Jocko.
You need. We didn't understand the brief. Okay, who put the brief together? Yeah, you did. So, but when people couldn't identify that they were the problem, and they wouldn't fix it, and that's not good.
I think Dudley might actually enlist after this podcast. He says often, he's like, God damn it, you guys sound like you had the best job in the world.
It's the best job in the world. I say that all the time, and it was awesome, and it was awesome for me to have the opportunity to pass those lessons on that my guys learned, and that I learned in that last deployment, and I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that shit, and did my best.
There's so much common theme.
Oh, yeah.
Like this whole podcast.
The whole last 3 days, there's a lot of crossover.
Well, even today, I mean, this is obviously life or death and was super critical to the country. But for the average guy at home that's just trying to change his life or be better, you go back to the first 5 minutes of this podcast, and it's the exact same message of literally, if you want to get good at something, you have to be willing to make it really hard, and you have to be willing to fail at it, and you have to be willing to jump into a fire pit and not be comfortable and jump into boiling water, or it could be as some people just won't even take a cold shower, even though it's really good for the body. It's like people just get in that half a second, they're like, well, I can't get used to this. That could be a common theme in your life. I mean, honestly, that is probably a common theme in your life. How long are you willing to really accept change to the point where, like, you know what, this is seriously not working, or actually I'm totally cool with this. Like, if this is as bad as it really isn't that bad. Like, I kind of psych myself out. Yeah, I'm pretty cool with this. And then all of a sudden, if you're I shouldn't say the right person, but I guess me personally, I would say, will it go a little bit colder? Because, like, I've got to this point, I'm okay with it. Like, can we turn it just a little bit? And there's certain things that I want to do that in. There's certain things where I feel satisfaction at a certain level, but I think there's other parts of life where, if you're really striving to get to a higher level of management, or if you're really trying to get to a better level at archery, like, excuses are a very common ground for the people that never make a progression that has to happen for anyone that excels in any type of activity. And if you make excuses in that middle ground, you'll never make it above that.
Yeah. All your excuses are lies.
What was the hardest position you held in the military? Most challenging or most difficult?
Tasking commander. Yeah. I mean, being in Ramadi, that's definitely.
Yeah. What do you miss the most about your time in service?
Working with the guys. Working with awesome guys and guys that want to get after it all the time.
Did you ever think that, so you got out 2010, 8 years later, you'd have the influence now that you do outside of the military? Because I would honestly say it's exponentially larger, obviously, than the cohort, because the SEAL teams are so small, and just the reach of things like what we're doing right now.
Yeah, no, it's been a real honor to end up in a situation where I still have, connections in the military and get to talk to a bunch of people all the time, and whether it's virtually or actually. So it's been awesome. I mean, definitely I hear from active duty people in every branch of service on the front lines all the time, and it's awesome. And I'm always stoked that they're tuning in, and like my podcast, I would have given anything to have had my podcast when I was 17, 18, 19, all the way through my retirement. I would have given anything to have that, because it's just lacking. We just don't have that. And there's a certain level of reading a book is good, right? Reading a book is great, actually, but reading a book and reflecting on it and having it reflected on by someone that is going to compare it to the things that you're going through is important, I think. So it's really humbling to be able to do it, and I'm lucky because I got lucky and started doing it, and some people are listening to it, and it's awesome.
Well, there's a reason I asked you about when you kind of developed the authority that you speak with a lot of these topics, because I look back. How many years did you do enlisted?
8.
And then
12.
So 12 as an officer.
Yep.
So I did 12 and 5. The other way, I enlisted 12. I received 0 additional training. I went to the exchange to, thankfully, the women that work there, and I said, I need to know what uniform I'm supposed to put on, and then also, if you have a few minutes, could you show me how to put it on?
Yep.
It was
the lack of leadership training in the SEAL teams was really bad, and that's one of the reasons why I pushed it so hard. And what I actually told the Commodore when I was starting to implement all this training, which I really just layered on top of what we were already doing. I just layered on these leadership levels. I said, we are the only military organization in the history of the world that doesn't have training for our leaders. We're the only one.
Well, what we do is just OJT,
it's
which
OJT.
is a mess.
It's OJT, which is great when you have a great leader that you're working for and they show you what to do and how to do it. Or you end up with a bad leader and they show you what to do and how to do it, and you think that's the right thing. So we really didn't have a good job, and we ended up, luckily, our people are good, or I should say, luckily, the high end of the bell curve of our people are awesome, and they would achieve the mission despite the bad leadership that they may or may not have had. And so we were able to achieve a lot and maintain our reputation. And it's not even about our reputation, that's part of it, but it's we were able to maintain our skill level and our operational capability just based on the fact that we got kick-ass E5s in a platoon that are like, hey, I will make this happen. Like, my boss is making a bad decision, but you know what? I'm going to move over here. I'm going to lay down. We're going to make this happen. And so we were able to go and maintain our operational capability just because of our screening process, our OJT that we did have, and the pipe hitting guys that we have in a freaking SEAL platoon. And so that's good, right? But that's not what you want. That's not that's not optimum. It's not ideal. And so,
and it's hard to repeat depending on who those people are saddled with.
Exactly. So it was definitely important for us to start focus on training the leaders, and they're doing a ton of it now.
I was going to ask how far down the process. I mean, is there doctrine written? Is there an established protocol?
I was writing the doctrine, and it became doctrine when I was in, and it wasn't just from me either. It was a combination of a vast bunch of guys that all got together and said, yeah, but it's the principles that I still talk about today. Those are in there, along with other people that had experience and put stuff together. So yeah, it became doctrine, and yeah, good.
It changed. It was. I think it was a incredibly impactful and worthwhile change, because it was, people ask me, and I'm sure they ask you too, how do you guys train your leaders? It's like, well, how honest do I want to be right now? And I am honest. And I kind of say the same thing, the OJT, which saddles you good or bad, whatever direction it may go. And should we do that with our organization? It's like, ooh.
Now here's something interesting. So when I got in the Navy, and I went through boot camp, and so I show up at Bud's, and I find out that the officer in charge of my class is going to be a Naval Academy guy, right? And I'm thinking to myself, wow, these guys, and there's actually a few of them, and then I started meeting Naval Academy guys, and I thought to myself, okay, these guys are going to be freaking awesome, because they just went to a 4-year academy to learn how to lead men. And what I found out eventually is that guys from the Naval Academy, they can be awesome, they can be horrible. Guys from OCS, they can be awesome, they can be horrible. Guys from ROTC, they can be awesome, they can be horrible. Prior enlisted officers, they can be awesome, they can be horrible. And so even when you train leaders, like, you've got to have this raw material that has an open mind, that's going to listen, that's going to be humble, and it's going to have that attitude. Otherwise, it's going to be problematic.
Is there one personality trait that would correlate everyone that was good?
For me, it's humility. I'll tell you this. So we ended up ranking, I created this thing at TradeEt, which was, I'm always surprised that I did this crap, but I created this thing at TradeEt where you assessed yourself.
Peer assessment.
Right? No, this wasn't
or
peer assessment. This was a self-assessment. Okay, so we'd hand it out to the leaders, and then we'd see, we'd track, okay, how are your tactical skills? How is your interoperability with your troops? How well do you detach and see what's going on? So we just had them fill this thing out, right? And I kind of had people fill it out. To be honest with you, I kind of forgot about it. Like, I told my guys, hey, have them fill this out in their first block of training. So the guys did it, and they collected because they're awesome guys. And then we got to this point where we were going to fire somebody. It was actually somebody from the troop that you had been working with. And I said to myself, I wonder how that guy rated himself.
I already know. If we're talking about the same
guy,
I know the answers.
We are. So I'm thinking, I wonder how this guy rated. This guy's horrible, an officer leader. An awful leader. And I wonder how he rated himself. So we go and pull his file.
10.
It was 1 through 5.
He was an academy guy as well.
It was all 5s. Yep. It was all 5s down the line, that he could not get any better at any leadership, tactical, strategic, operational skill set that existed. He couldn't get any better.
He should be a 4-star immediately.
So, and then I said to myself, wow, that's crazy. So then I said, and there was another guy in a different task unit that was awesome, an awesome guy. And I go, hey, pull this guy's record. And so I get his record, I open it up, and his trait average was a 2.4. And I went and talked to him, and I go, bro, I go, hey man, you're like really good at this job, and I just want to talk about your self-assessment because it seems like you've got some dings on yourself. What's going on with tactical decision making? Why'd you give yourself a 2.0 out of 5? He's like, I just feel like I could be sharpen up my skills a little bit, and I always feel like I'm hesitating when I should be a little bit more decisive. Okay, what about this one here where you talk about how well your troops respond to your commands? Like, I watch you do it, and they do a great job of making happen the decisions that you make. And he's like, yeah, I know, but I feel like I don't communicate clearly enough, and I want to. So here's a guy that's the best out of however many officers were at SEAL Team 3 at the time that were platoon commanders or task unit commanders. I'm saying this guy's awesome, and he was completely hard on himself on everything. And it dawned on me that at that point, okay, the guy that sucks is arrogant and has a big ego, and the guys that are awesome. And then I went and looked through them all, and of course, the better the guy, the worse the scores. Generally, the better the guy, the worse the scores, and the worse the guy, the better the scores. Crazy.
What about from the? You were competing at a ridiculously high level in archery, if not the apex of it. What did you see for character trait that got people on the podiums the most often?
I would say in that world, the highest egos get people on the podium the most.
Interesting.
But they'll have a run. But I think the people that have longevity within the strike, like there'll be people that are there for a very long period of time within a very small group of super elites. They're the ones that are very task and humble and just grind.
They can ride the waves, the up and down.
Yeah, it's difficult because the line would be consistent. It would be like, say you had a scale from 1 to 10. They would be at an 8.5 or 9 for probably most of the length of their entire career, whereas you would see more like a stock market type curve for the other people where it would spike and be up for a very long, it'd be like a company that was just dominant for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden it crashes and everyone's just in this pandemonium, and it might be that way for a long time, and then it has this little spike somewhere down the road, but then it goes back down.
Well, that's very kind of classic, right? I have a big ego, I have the confidence, I get to the top, I'm on the top, and what do? I believe my own bullshit. And I start thinking, Dudley will never beat me. He'll never beat me. So guess what? Instead of shooting 200 arrows today, I'm going to shoot 100. And meanwhile, Dudley's over there going, I'm going to shoot 900, right? That's how, because you're humble and you're saying, okay, how am I going to get better? How am I going to make this happen? Again, that being said, if you're shooting a final round for something, and you're thinking, I don't know if I deserve to be here, that's not going to help you out either. You got to be thinking, like if you're in a SEAL platoon and you're thinking, hey, look, I don't know if I should be in charge or not, that's not good either. So I'm not talking about you don't have any ego whatsoever. When you see a guy that lacks confidence in a leadership position in a SEAL platoon, it's awful. It's awful, and he's not going to be successful. Most of the time, this is why I talk about humility so much, because most of the time, the guy has confidence. And so that's not a problem. When it becomes a problem is when their ego's too big. Seldom did I get a guy that was just too humble and didn't believe in themselves or didn't have the confidence. That would seldom happen. But it did happen. It did happen occasionally.
Well, humble people, if they're good, most likely have confidence. It's whether or not they want to share that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big part of it. My boy asked me, he said, well, when you were really into it, how much did you win? And I said, well, I barely won. 160 professional events, 20 something travels a year, million miles traveling around. I said, I only podiumed, 13 times, 13 out of 160. Was I always within the top 5? 60% of the time. Was I always in the top 10? 100% of the time. So, but I was totally okay with that because I also picked and chose my battles that best suited my traits. When I went to a range that required more effort, very steep terrain, things where people that I knew weren't in shape for that terrain, I would literally say, I know I'm going to win this event. This is my key. Am I going to try to go to this event where I know there's a lot of wind and this guy's got a 26-inch draw length, he's got a way shorter projectile, like this suits his style perfectly. Am I going to put a lot of effort in that? No, I'm going to stay in practice and I'm going to stay sharp, but when I get through that, I'm not going to let that outcome impact my self-image. But then I know I'm getting ready to mash the hammer on these people where it's like when it gets into my wheelhouse, here I come. And then maybe immediately following that, I know deep down this isn't my wheelhouse, but I'm still going to pick and choose what I want to work on. And that's when I would do what I had told you, like with my selective cycling. If I knew I had an event coming up where it really was an event that suited me, I would just pick what's the weakest part of my game right now, and I'm going to go to this event and I'm going to just try to make this better. Mm-hmm. And if I leave here without a win, if I can make every shot and not make this mistake, this is setting me up for something that's down the road that I know I want. And a lot of people can't like.
Well, that's what you just said is exactly what I was talking about earlier. If you stay in your comfort zone in jiu-jitsu and you just do what's going to make you win and you don't leave in it, you don't take any risks and focus on some things that you're not good at, then you might win right then, but in the long term you're going to get worse because you're not exposing your weaknesses so you can learn how to deal with them.
Speaking of jiu-jitsu, somebody at this table ordered a bunch of mats, and it's not you or me or Trevor. So you're going to have to guess who it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. He's like, oh, is this the right kind of mats I might be able to get for my house? And I was like, no, get these kind. And then 3 minutes later, done.
Yeah. Ding. Amazon Prime shows up on Thursday.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, I think he's just pissed at me that I'm like 6 classes ahead of him.
Oh, I'm really pissed at you.
Yeah.
Did I explain this?
Here it comes.
Yeah. So I'm where were we? We were in Utah 2 weeks ago, and Andy's all
Traeger HQ.
Yeah, I'm holding an event for like a cooking class and a shooting school. Meanwhile, one of me and Andy's mutual sponsors, Killcliff, is there, and GW and John are there, and GW is really, really into jiu-jitsu. So I'm over here with my group talking, and I hear Andy out, like in the back of my head, I hear, yeah, I'm taking jiu-jitsu. It's my 5th class. And I literally, like the DJ just took the freaking vinyl needle across the record, and I'm like, you bitch. Like,
yeah.
And I said, what? And he goes, I bought a 10-pack. And I'm thinking, yeah, and you're going to tell me when we're at hunting camp, when I like decide to start like jacking around one night after we're drinking, and all of a sudden he's going to slip some kind of weird
Next thing you know,
little sucker. Yeah, Jocko's coming for 10 lessons to my house next week on my new mats.
Check. Let's do it.
After your throat recovers.
Dude, I'm good with that.
Your Adam's apple.
I drink out of the left side. Just tilting my head. I'm fine.
That was awesome last night.
Did he tell you about my my leg sweep I did today?
Yeah, he told me judo tripped him out coming out of the aircraft.
Yeah.
Trapped my foot. Literally, as we're leaving, there's a systematic, you up, down, and then you push out, and he goes up and comes down, and in my head, I just hear myself go, oh no.
Friggin' leg sweep,
and
I'm out by myself.
No choice but to just, as we left the plane, throw him away from me so I didn't rip all of us over onto our back.
Were you supposed to be hanging on to him the whole time?
Yes.
Oh, nicely done.
It was a double.
Like I said, that was my best jump of the day.
Yeah. He had his main.
What number jump was that?
3.
Yeah.
That was your.
The third.
That was your third jump.
I felt really good on that one. You know, I felt fine with that.
He's doing incredibly well. He's literally.
Sweep the leg, Johnny.
critiquing
I
himself and
really
shaking
wanted to
his
go
head
up at
in
the end
free
of the.
fall.
I hated leaving
Yeah,
there
you had
on
to
a
leave
bad
on that
note.
bad note.
Good.
That
You
is,
gotta put a couple
I
more arrows in
probably
there.
like. I'm good if we do this until 12 more hours, then we can be at the DZ. Because
So-
otherwise, if we go home, I'm going to sleep about an hour, and then I'm going to wake up thinking about that.
So what's funny is I had to repeat the same jump that he was on in my progression, and it happened at the end of a day, and it chewed me up. I think I was an E4 at the time.
Oh, so you have to repeat that jump,
Oh,
don't
yes.
you? Oh, yeah, you failed.
So
Oh, you
Damn.
grab your knife and twist
That
it.
sucks.
but I remember
Grab your little switchblade comb and and just twist it a little bit. Look at
Sorry,
him.
man.
in 1999, I was saving up. Yeah, I was saving up to pay for AFF because I was like an E4 living out in Coronado, like, and I only had enough money to make it through. And then I failed that jump, and I had to call a guy from my platoon and borrow like $200, which was a catastrophically large sum
Yeah,
of money at the time.
Yeah. That's like 3 hours at the bar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was so pissed that night. It ate me up, and then I went back, and I was like, this isn't happening again. But I actually think it's a good thing that it happened.
Yeah.
The people who sail through, they'll have an experience early on in their career that scares the crap out of them, which they also need that too to ground them a little bit. But I think it's better to happen at this point in the progression.
Same theme.
Yeah.
Exact same theme.
Yeah, it'll keep you humble.
Yep.
So that list of what were the character traits that self-assessment that you were grading people on?
I can't remember, but it was tactical type stuff.
Yeah.
Mixed in with some character traits, but it was mostly tactical stuff. It was like 6 or 7 things.
Yeah.
Things that aren't quite on the Navy eval or the Navy fit rep, but how is your tactical decision? How do you rate yourself on tactical decision making?
Yeah.
How do you rate yourself on being able to read terrain? Like, it was just simple things like that are very, very important from a leadership perspective, like reading terrain. And we could sit here and talk all day. I mean, you must be a master of reading terrain, but reading terrain for tactical reasons, which is kind of what you do as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know where the dead space is, and then from a tactical perspective, in a firefight, it's like, okay, where can I get the high ground? Where is dead space where I can't get shot? So the better a leader is at reading terrain, not only during the operation, but prior to the operation, understanding it. And it goes in urban environments as well. What does that terrain look like? How do I read that terrain? So it was things like that.
Yeah.
I'll try and think about what that list says and give it to you.
Well, my follow-up question was going to be, what category would you rate yourself the highest on, and which one would you give yourself the lowest marks on?
I was always felt like I could do better at everything. That's the way I always felt. The things that I was usually pretty good at. I was usually pretty good at looking at complex things and making them simple. And that's probably due to the fact I'm just dumb, and I just thought, okay, I'm a caveman. This looks really complicated. I'm gonna simplify this thing. So I was always pretty good at that, and I was always pretty good at detaching from all the stuff that was happening and figuring out what is really happening. So those are things that I was pretty good at. I was always loud. I could raise my voice and be loud, and that's important. That wasn't one of the characteristics, but as a leader, that was a thing that I really found to be useful, was to be able to be loud. And most of the guys that I put through training could do it. Occasionally we get a guy that wasn't loud, and if they didn't figure out a way to compensate for that, which you could easily do, because you've got, if there's 15 guys in a SEAL platoon and you're not loud, or there's 16 guys in a SEAL platoon and you're not loud, there's 15 guys that are loud. So all you have to do is get the loud guys to pass the word, and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And there was actually a guy that came through training that was a leader, and he wasn't loud, and I thought to myself, he's gonna have a problem. But he was also really smart, and he's the first person that I saw literally pass the word in spoken, room normal voice to his loudest E5s, who would then put the word out, and they would make it happen. I said, oh, he's very clever, this guy. and it worked really well.
Yeah.
And that is a lesson that I learned, and it doesn't just apply to being loud, it applies to being a leader. And if you're a leader, and you're going to have weaknesses, right? You're going to have weaknesses. And when you have weaknesses, you find people that are going to complement your weaknesses and cover for you on the areas where you're not strong. And so I always did my best to identify people that could cover my weaknesses for me.
I tell people when they ask me about teamwork and leadership, the best leaders that I've ever seen spend more than enough time trying to identify people much smarter and more capable than they are to staff their own personal weaknesses. Because it's not about them, it's about the team.
Absolutely. And some people are intimidated by that. And they think, oh, if Andy's better than me at planning and I let him plan this, everyone's going to look at him like he's a better planner than me. And the reality is they are going to look at you and think you're a better planner than me. And then they're going to realize, wow, Jocko's a humble guy that would rather we win than he gets to make the decision on the plan. And you know what? That's right. I would rather win than have it be my ego-driven plan that we're going to execute. I don't care. And so let's pick the best plan. And if your plan's better, I'm going to pick that thing all day long.
I think there's a really good absorption rate with simplicity. I mean, people comment that my coaching's good, but all I've done is taken all the coaching that I've had over a plethora of years and literally just said, how do I break this down to where it's really all that matters when it comes to cause and effect. And so with you, I told you, I'm like, give me 2 hours and I'm going to be pretty confident. I'm going to be pretty confident I can get you on a road to where you're going to be able to, build your confidence in what you're doing, and you're going to be able to understand it and compute it. And then I'm also going to be able to follow up without confusing you, because I'm not. What I always tell people is, I think good leaders or good coaches are ones that realize that they're not going to be there all the time, and they have to be able to self-assess. And if you give them too much to chew on, self-assessment is really hard when, even the fact that you had 6 questions, I would argue that that's better than having, a 20-part checklist, because in the end, people probably they're not going to be able to absorb 20 different things they need to work on. But if there's 6 that are literally the key points, to where then if you find one that's weak and you can maybe break that down a little more at that time and say, okay, let's look at this a little more. So if this is your weakness, let's just put a magnifying glass on that.
Yeah.
And let's break this into 3 parts. What if we just make this part better? Is the whole thing going to get better? Yeah. Okay, what if we make 2 of these better? You're comfortable with those 2? Now 3.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden that weakness is their biggest strong point, and because of that, their confidence is higher than it ever was prior to that.
So what you just described it really relates to decentralized command as a leader. And what you said is, hey, look, if you give me all this information, I'm not going to be able to self-assess. I'm not going to be able to do it on my own because I'm not going to know what to look at. But if you give me like the broad guidance and I understand the simple things clearly, then I can make assessments. And that means on the battlefield, I can make decisions because I know what it is you want me to do. I know the goal that you have in mind for me. Instead of you telling me exactly every little detail, well, now I'm confused and I don't even know where I'm going in the end. What I really need to know is, where are we going? And I'll do my best to get us there, and then you give me some guidelines that I stay within, and as long as I'm doing that, we're good. And then, guess what? Guess what a good leader does with decentralized command? Occasionally you come in and you check and say, let me take a look at what you got. And I go, hey, here's where we're going. Okay, that looks good. Adjust this a little bit, adjust that a little bit. Okay, great, I can do that, and we move forward. So that's as a leader, as a teacher, you use that method. That's perfect.
Stop.
No way. I got questions.
Let's hear them.
No, it's actually...
Is it jiu-jitsu? Are you trying to one-up me now?
No, I'll do all that when you're not
mats.
here. Obviously, I'll ask all the pertinent jiu-jitsu questions when you're not in the room so I can get ahead. Duh. That's day one stuff. And Jocko and I will FaceTime every day as he teaches me techniques.
I like how we were playing for like a minute, and then you just said, okay, you two need to stay friends. Let's...
I like how it went from 0 to 150 miles an hour in a second.
Well, and you guys are at a stage where you can really accidentally hurt each other, and it's just, I'm thinking to myself, you want to skydive, you have a life that revolves around the use of your shoulders and arms, and, you do too, and I don't want either one of you guys breaking each other and twisting something for some stupid reason, and although... I guess this is really a sad sign of my maturity. Because like 5 years ago, I'd been like, I would have let that go and I would have egged it on. How are you going to let him do that to you, you little bitch?
Yeah. You gonna let him get your hand like that? I know. But it's fascinating. I love sitting down and talking with people with different backgrounds about leadership, especially sitting across the table talking to you, because we never directly worked with or for each other. It was peripheral. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was asking you like kind of about your background, and where you learned the lessons, because I read your book, Extreme Ownership, and it's like turn the page, you're like, yep, I know that one. Yep, I know that one. And even though we never worked directly together, the origin is, you brought who you were to the Navy. I brought who I was to the Navy. I brought an inch taller to the Navy. I just want to point that out, that I'm slightly taller than you.
What's hilarious is that your self-image was way shorter than Jocko's, and I will attest to that. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah.
How did that even come to be?
I don't know. People think I'm taller than I am. I'm 5'11".
He thought you were way taller.
235 pounds.
Dude, Jocko's way taller than me. I go, I met him in an airport. I'm pretty sure. I said, I think you're the same size. He's like, oh no, he's way taller.
Yeah.
I was off by 3 inches. Yeah.
People, when they meet me, they think I'm shorter. And they're surprised I'm not in black and white, since I do all my pictures. That's right, we met in that airport.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Yeah, we originally met in the airport.
We literally walked by one another, and then, the only thing we had in common was we were both friends of Joe's.
Yeah.
So we just kind of took a quick selfie, and
that's
I think you shot it to Joe.
I sent it to Joe. Yeah.
And then we just kept walking, and then that was it.
In an airport, random.
I think it was wasn't it New York?
I think it was New York.
Yeah.
Who spotted who?
I spotted him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I literally walked by and I was like,
Well, because you can see everybody.
yes. Jocko was going through the airport like Jason Bourne. He looked at me. He's like, defenseless. Just friggin' looked at me, and I thought, he caught eye contact. I'm like, why is he checking me out? But then he just literally just looked right through me and kept going, sheep, a giraffe.
I had that.
I'll friggin' hyena bite that sucker.
That when I was in Africa, and I had eye contact with a rhino.
Oh no!
And I was like, oh, this is what this feels like, because I can't take that thing out. That thing could kill me. I was like, oh, that doesn't feel good. I don't like that feeling. And if that's one of those ego things where I don't like that feeling of hey, this person could take me. And that's one of the reasons why I became very into jiu-jitsu, because just knowing that, hey, I don't want, like the first time, really, it was a buddy of mine that was a SEAL that had just gotten obsessed with jiu-jitsu, and we started together. We started training together. This old Master Chief taught us the basics. I was telling you guys the other night, taught us the most fundamental basics. And then when we got home from, that was on deployment, we got home from that deployment, and this guy, Jeff Higgs is his name, awesome guy. He went and found a place and started training all the time. And then he came over to my house 2 or 3 years later.
Did he tell you about it when he found it?
Yeah, he told me about it, but he didn't he didn't say, "Hey man, you got to come down." He might have whispered about it. Wasn't super strong. I'll have to
I
ask
needed
Jeff
you to
about
say
that.
no, but he didn't tell you.
But I will say this: after him training hardcore for 3 years, he calls me up. He's like, "Hey, do you want to train?" And I'm like,
"Here we go."
Yeah, I'm like, "Cool, yeah, man, come on over." He comes over and just ties me up like a pretzel. And I was like, okay, this is not going to happen to me ever again if I can help it. And I went down and signed up, and I started training all the time so that I wouldn't be in a situation where someone could impose their will on me, because I hate that feeling.
Did it help you with your philosophy on leadership?
It 100% helped me on my philosophy.
Oh my gosh.
And I'll tell you, and I talked about this, I did a podcast about judo, and I talked about this whole idea of I think for me, jiu-jitsu started to connect the various things, because when I started seeing it in jiu-jitsu, then I started seeing it in combat, and then I started seeing it in leadership. That's the kind of how it went. The classic example is like in jiu-jitsu, you can't attack. I can't just attack your arm. If I attack your arm, you can defend it because you know what I'm doing. If you know any jiu-jitsu at all, you know what I'm doing. So I have to attack your arm. I have to set up on your arm, but then I got to go for something else. I got to flank you. And so I realized, I was like, oh, I do this in jiu-jitsu. And here's what you do when you're on the battlefield. You put down covering fire, and then you flank the enemy. That's how you beat him. Oh, okay, cool. What about if a guy's got a giant ego that you're trying to work with? Do you attack that ego? No, you don't. You give that ego a little massage. You get a little bit of, you give little pieces of bread, and then while you're doing that, you come around the side and you get inside their brain and you start working on them from the inside. So that's like one of the many, many examples of how this all started to tie together for me. And again, the more I saw the way, the more the way revealed itself in every other thing that I saw.
Looking back on your time in the teams, and I'm going to ask this because it's interesting, the questions I get about you, because they will ask me because I think they're afraid to ask you. Some people seem to know that we know each other. We talked about this when I was on your podcast too. It's like, it's okay, people, if we can go back and forth a little bit online. Like, we actually know each other. It's going to be just fine. You don't need to come out of the Twitter bleachers and just try to go nuclear. Like, it's I'm baffled constantly by the things that people do. What would be the best way to describe this? You cut a wide path. It's and knowing you, we don't know each other incredibly well, but I know you well enough to know that you're just like any other person, right? There's ups and downs, and it's a sine wave. And I have found that a lot of people looking at you from the outside are like, dude, there's no sine wave to this guy. He's just straight across the board. No ups, no downs, no struggles. It's 4:30 in the morning, steak, and unfortunately mint chip ice cream, right? I know you well enough to know that's not the case. And I would say my leadership failures potentially outweigh my successes. They're the ones that hang with me the most, where for me, the question I'm going to ask you is what's looking back at your time in the SEAL teams, what would you say was your biggest leadership failure? And for me, I look back at those things and I know I've had moments where I gave into emotion and I let it take control and I pushed it too hard and just then realized later on, like, oh my God, I was actually in charge in that moment, and I might as well just, not that I wore a collar device in the field, but just throw it for the example that I set to the people. And I felt guilty afterwards and still do, because it was a terrible example to set, and I hope that nobody had that imprinted on them as that was the way it was supposed to be. But that also has driven me to try to be a better example in the other things that I do as well. So can you think back?
Clearly for me, the worst thing that happened to me was it's the first chapter of Extreme Ownership. It's having a fratricide, having a blue on blue with a friendly Iraqi soldier getting killed by one of my guys getting wounded, another 2 or 3 Iraqi soldiers getting wounded, having my guys in a building where a Humvee pulls up and puts 150 rounds of 50 caliber machine gun into the building from 20 meters away. This is a nightmare. And you know, when I look back on it, that was absolutely horrible. And you know, in combat, bad things are going to happen. I mean, there's you can do everything right, and you can still get killed. I mean, you can still lose guys. And you can look back at it and you can torture yourself saying, well, what could I have done differently? Well, you could obviously done things different. You can always look and say, well, we didn't have to do that mission. And there's all kinds of emotions you can get tied around in that respect to say, like, you know, like what you said, John, earlier, like you can't, the arrow's gone, right? But that's the situation where I look back and I realized, hey, there's things that I should have done better and I didn't do them. And so it was a horrible situation, and that's that. You know, I did what I knew to do, and it did take me some time to come to that conclusion, and realizing that when I say come to the conclusion to say, you know what, guys, this was my fault. Mm-hmm. That was hard to do, and it was kind of like what you said, John, of turning. Like it was, I went from defensive, and this is all just in my brain. I went from being very defensive about what happened, like, hey, it was, you know, the Iraqis did this and this Marines did this and the soldiers did that and it was their fault. And I didn't verbalize any of that. Thank God I didn't, because I was just trying to figure out where I was going to point the finger. And as I sat there and tried to figure out where I was going to point the finger, I didn't feel comfortable with any of it. And the reason I didn't feel comfortable with any of it is because I had been raised, luckily, by the guys that I respected in the SEAL teams, was when you screw something up, you own it.
Yep.
And this wasn't like the first time I ever took ownership of. I mean, I had taken ownership for years of every time something went bad. When I was going through the workup with my task unit, when I wouldn't say, hey, the platoon commander screwed us up, I'd be like, hey, I didn't brief the platoon commander well enough, or I didn't tell the machine gunners what they needed to do. I would take responsibility for that. And just like I talk about all the time, those guys brought that same attitude. Once I started taking ownership, they'd be like, no, boss, you don't need to do that. That's my fault. But so this wasn't like the first time I ever said I need to take responsibility, but this is the first time where, okay, first of all, a guy's dead. One of my guys is wounded. I'm looking at my wounded guy in the back of the room who's got his face wrapped up because he's got 50 cal frag in his head. And I mean, is that a miracle that you're not dead? Yes, it indeed is. I mean, I talked to him like a month ago, and he's like, yeah. He was on the rooftop of the building, and there's 50 cal rounds coming through the concrete, and he lays down, and he has a sniper gun, which is now like in a pile, and he lays down, he pulls out his pistol, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna die. And if this 50 cal doesn't, what they didn't think it was a 50 cal, they thought it was a Dishka.
Yeah.
They thought it was a Dishka, a 12.7 millimeter Dishka, which, by the way, that very guy had 12 hours earlier, he'd been shot out of a sniper tower by a Dishka and had the stock blown off of his sniper rifle with an RPG. And so now he's getting shot. It's been 12 hours. He's getting shot at with the Dishka again. He just thinks, okay, well, This is just par for the course for my dumbass. but looking at him, and you know, he's in the back of the room, and he should very well be dead, as could every single guy in that element. And you know, and I said to so to swallow that and say to myself, okay, this is your fault, and it's not just saying like, okay, this was my fault, guys. It's like, no. Let me explain this to you. Everything that just happened, that is actually because I fucking failed as a leader. That's why. And so that is something that, you know, I'll never forget. And I hope that other people, you know, can learn from it. But it hurts.
Yeah, for sure. You got anything else, Stud? I only got one more thing.
What?
Thank you for what you do. I'm very appreciative of the fact that you have the platform and the voice that you do. We got lucky, I think, in the community. And I got lucky early on. My parents set my moral compass for me well. I learned a lot of lessons that were reinforced in the SEAL teams with bricks in my hands when I was 11. And my dad would just say, yeah, there's 500, put them on the roof. I'm like, but Dad, I'm only 11 years old, you know? I only weigh 120 pounds. And he's like, yeah, cool. Lunch is at noon and it's 8, and they better be up there by 9:30. Because then when you're done with that, those other 500 bricks, they need to go. And so I learned hard work and like goal setting and all that stuff. And I took some of that into the teams, and it definitely got reinforced because I had the same experience of, for me, pointing out bad catastrophic leadership. It's like, oh, let me write that down. Pointing out really good leadership, I struggle with sometimes because it's so effortless and seamless that stuff is just getting done because so many people are empowered and they're like, God damn it, how is that guy doing that? But I think you help fill the void between those two by explaining it a lot more, and your reach is awesome. And there's a lot of things I would like to change about our society. Probably the number one for me would be is if people would just think of themselves as a leader regardless of who they are, and they acted accordingly, or at least tried and went on the journey of self-realization like, oh, I suck right now. Maybe I could do a better job. And I think you're driving the spear right into the chest of that, man. And it's awesome, and it helps me out a ton. I love listening to your podcast. I point people to your book all the time. They'll pay me to like come speak in an organization like,
oh, what book do you recommend? I'm like, have you ever heard of Jocko? I know you have because you're wearing his shirt, you weirdo. But you need to go and I point people at it. I'm super appreciative of the fact that you have the platform that you do. So, dude, keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Post, obviously, military service, because that's something in and of itself.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to have this platform. It's an honor for me to be able to share stories. A lot of what I do is share stories of people that were in the military and made incredible sacrifices. And it's really, really easy to forget it. And it's also really easy to go to a movie and watch something about it and think, okay, well, that's what happened, and I kind of get it now. But it's like, no, you don't get it. When you hear it from the people in their voice that they wrote about, I think that's the most powerful way to get it, actually. I think it's the most powerful way to get it. And it's an honor for me to be able to share the stories, and I'm super stoked that other people are listening to them out there. And obviously, thanks for your service. You came on my podcast a while ago. So if anybody is wondering if they want to listen to Andy, do you know what podcast you were on?
I know it was in the 60s. I want to say 64.
Okay, so yeah, Andy was on my podcast 64. I'm sure we'll do it again at some point. And this has been a really cool couple days. John, again, appreciate everything you did for me with the bow and with the instruction. And I love adding that to my quiver of things that I have. So that's
you see
awesome.
What he did there?
Yeah, real good like that.
Yep. Sneaky little guy.
Hell yeah.
Awesome.
Right on, gents.
Thanks, man.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. That is it for this week. 50 episodes. Hard to believe, like I said in the beginning. And I tell you what, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for the feedback, or I wouldn't have continued to do it if it wasn't for the feedback of the people listening and the support of the people listening. So all I can really say is thank you, everybody, whoever you are, wherever you are, for all the support you've given. The pictures of the podcast merchandise that I constantly get, and I need to do a better job of reposting, but I can see where people are buying it from, and it's surprisingly enough to me all over the world. Can't thank you enough. What else is new? I think that's about it for this week. I'm going to be getting on the road here a little bit. If you live in Australia, I'm heading your way here in about a week. I don't know how much free time I'm going to have, but hit me up if you have suggestions for things that I should do. I think I'm going to hit Perth, Melbourne, and Sydney in a 3-day time period doing some speaking. But if I have any time off and if people have any suggestions, I'm all ears as to what you would recommend from your own country. And I think that's it. Other than the time is now to join us on the Free Range American, what would it be? Tour? I don't know. Movement. The Free Range American movement is what it is. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, go to freerangeamerican.us and get some. By that I mean read about it and